everyone. Thanks for joining us here on The Real Story. I'm Emma Wulfhorst. We've been deeply committed to covering energy on a local, regional, and federal level. While Connecticut customers have some of the highest rates in the country, we've reported on state regulation of utility corporations, laws meant to bolster affordability, grid concerns, and the future of energy infrastructure, and of course, sources of energy, including greener investments like offshore wind farms. This week, the state announced it would once again choose regional collaboration to keep moving forward with reliable and sustainable energy transmission. I got a chance to check in with State Senator Norm Needleman, chair of the Energy and Technology Committee, after he threw his support behind Connecticut becoming the 10th state to join this new energy pact. Take a listen. So some pretty big news this past week. Connecticut is joining this new multi-state energy collaborative. So starting out big picture here, what does this mean for offshore wind energy and for customers now here in Connecticut?
Well, I want to say that the governor and the commissioner have worked really hard on multiple regional collaborative arrangements, and this one has borne a lot of fruit, because I think that for the offshore wind industry, interconnections are always going to be the big challenge, and this will allow to bring a high level of efficiency, which should result in resiliency and lower costs to the ratepayers for offshore wind. You know, we have the entire Atlantic seaboard, which is ideal for offshore wind, and for each state to be working as an independent entity, or even just ISO New England doing their thing, New York and New Jersey and Maryland doing their own. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So this took a lot of work on the commissioner's part and on the governor's part, and I'm very excited. I think this is a big, big story.
And you've been outspoken before saying there's just not enough being done on the federal level, but regionally, you know, we see a lot of work being done now here. I feel like we've sort of seen this back and forth, you know, lawmaker conversations of this isn't a state issue or state responsibility, it needs to come from Capitol Hill, but, you know, sometimes it just doesn't. So how's this sort of in between this now regional collaboration working out?
Like I said, this is not a mandate necessarily, but it shows that the states are working together. And in the best of all worlds, why other countries can make more progress than the United States can is because of the way we're larger, for example, than the European countries. You know, when it comes to everything we do, we work off the 50-state model, including here we work off the RTO, you know, the regional transmission, you know, regional, like ISO New England model for other states. Some states have stayed independent, and it's not the way to build out the most efficient carbon-free future for our country. There's large areas of the United States where solar, for example, is more available and more efficient, and other areas where wind onshore and offshore are efficient. So if our future is to reduce carbon as much as possible and manage cost and reliability, we really need to think as though we're one country. In the absence of the federal government doing that, I think that what we have here is states binding themselves together to try to work out the most efficient solutions.
And we know for this region here in the Northeast, you know, it shares this interconnected grid. It's a grid that companies and you and your colleagues, we've heard from other lawmakers, have expressed concerns about. You know, it's something we talk about a lot, we hear a lot about. What's being done or what needs to be a priority this coming session in your committee when it comes to our grid?
I would think that, you know, what I would certainly like to move beyond is the hostile reaction that we've seen from the utilities about them being regulated a little more tightly than they had been. It's a constant barrage, and I would like to see that end. That said, that's not within my purview. Those are corporate decisions, and it's no secret I support the path that PURA has taken. We want healthy public utilities, but we also want the ratepayers in the states to feel confident that we're looking out for their interests. That's a fine line to balance in a deregulated environment. So I would like to see that we do as much as we can to incentivize that to the extent that it's within our purview. But I also think that working on pathways for collaboration to bring costs down and make sure that we're not impacting reliability while like-minded states are on a path to carbon reduction is critical. This is not a short-term problem, even though we have today impacts from sort of negligence on this. We need to do as much as we can and not bankrupt the ratepayers, but at the same time, make sure that our shared goals in the states that are collaborating, which are to reduce carbon emissions and come up with renewable energy, are fostered. So we're going to work on that. I've been sort of toying around and tossing out the idea to my colleagues on the transportation, housing, environment committees to come up with a broader grand strategy with the administration on actually how do we comprehensively address climate change, and what can we do to facilitate that. I do not believe that it's the job of the legislature to do the job of the executive branch, but we can facilitate things, laws that maybe make it easier to work on things like energy efficiency in older buildings. Senator Cohn and Senator Haskell did a big environment transportation bill. It's led to a little bit of controversy in some areas. I don't believe in getting ahead of the market, but I believe in setting out clear directives to the market, and making it easier for the public to do the things that policymakers think we should be doing to move ourselves forward.
And you mentioned costs before. I want to talk a little bit about that, costs for consumers and costs for the state, especially when it comes to offshore energy. So let's start with these contracts. We have seen some turmoil. We saw some dropped contracts and large price tags. How would you explain where we stand right now with the cost of wind energy, and what are the hopes 5-10 years out?
So look, we were on a very clear trajectory prior to 2019, where with all renewables, we saw with subsidized deployment initially, costs began to come down. The subsidy should go away or be lessened considerably, eventually to go away completely. We are always going to be dealing with natural gas in the Northeast being the least expensive way to generate energy. But when you look at cradle to grave natural gas from fracking and drilling and piping and all of the negative impacts there's hidden costs, not just the actual cost of the natural gas. So we have to think a little bit broader than the absolute cost. But quite frankly, when a low or low middle income family gets an electric bill, they're not thinking costs that are abstract. They're looking at their bill. Right? We want to make sure that the people in our state and in our region can afford electricity, can afford to heat their homes. We have to fashion thoughtful policies around how to get there. But I think the fact that we're all on the same page, even in most cases, Democrats and Republicans in these states understand that we need to do something. I tend to be a moderate by demeanor as much as anything, and look to make sure that we're doing things equitably, whether it's for urban poor or rural poor, working class. I want to make sure that our electricity is affordable, non-polluting, that we're doing our part to mitigate climate change, even though we're a small state. But as a region, 10 states, that's a fairly substantial number of people. And I think that we are like-minded in that way. But again, going back to the 50-state model, other states don't have those priorities. So they become more competitive from a business point of view if their electric costs are half of ours. So we've got to figure out, I spend a lot of time talking to the commissioner of DEEP and a lot of time talking to the new commissioner of DECD. How do we make this work? How do we help ratepayers? How do we help businesses? How do we encourage business development in the state? We've got to find a path.
When it comes to striking that balance, you were talking about obviously the importance of making this affordable cost for consumers as well as small businesses in the state. We know the state is still making moves toward greener energy, and it's important to remind people, and as you brought up, utility companies have to sell a minimum amount of renewable energy, but there's a price tag before people see savings in the future from these things. It's an investment now for possible change later. Eversource and other companies say they need to increase rates so they can get in more on offshore wind farms, or the legislature spending more on sustainable energy infrastructure. But we know sustainable energy sources are costly, but they're also really important. We know, though, customers want to see relief now. Can you talk to me a little bit more about how the state can balance both of those things, making those crucial investments while, still having relief for customers?
I'll be honest, it's the most complicated problem that I've ever, had to deal with. And I've dealt with some pretty complicated problems in my life, which is pretty long, by the way. This one requires a lot of thought and a lot of collaboration amongst groups. Although I'm a big believer that advocates should have a role in this, I think it's really the people who roll up their sleeves and do the work, not the ideologues and the advocates as much as the people who have to fashion solutions here. So, for example, when we did Take Back Our Grid, we did something that was sort of first for us. We did hardship rate structure, which Pura has been working on for a while, to make sure that the lowest of the low-income people get some break on the cost of some of these, electric bills that they have. To somebody like me, I'm in a pretty good position financially at the end of my working career here. If I pay a little bit more so somebody can pay a little bit less, we have a better environment. I'm okay with that. On the other hand, I run a business and I'm a large consumer of electricity and I make business decisions all the time. We want to make sure that businesses that want to stay here or relocate here have the ability to, or grow here, for example, have the ability to be competitive. And we don't want the cost of energy in New England, in Connecticut, to be the deciding factor as to why they move to North Carolina or South Carolina. We don't want that to be the case. So that's where the rubber meets the road. I think we can help the working poor and the lower income folks beyond the working poor without a huge amount of impact. But how do you subsidize, a multinational company? That gets more complicated. And that's why the dialogue between Commissioner Dykes and Commissioner O'Keefe is so critical, and why I like to be part of that conversation, because we need to facilitate that communication so that no agency, and I think the governor has done a terrific job with making sure that the agencies communicate with each other. Any role that I can play in helping with that, I'm here to help. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. But seriously, I'm a better facilitator of ideas than many of the other things that I do. So communication is critical. Communication to the public, communication between the agencies is really critical.
And we know this communication is going to keep going, as well as these conversations. As you said, this is a complex, balance to strike, and it's something that's going to keep going on. So in our last minute here, looking ahead to next session, we know when it comes to climate-related bills, we've had 2 previous sessions where not a lot got done. This past legislative session, the big omnibus bill dubbed Green Monster really leaned into incentives for renewable energy and a more sustainable future instead of mandates. Your Republican colleagues said this would win them over, but in the end, the big policy package wasn't able to pass through. We do see a lot of things being roped together in omnibus. Some lawmakers I spoke to said that's just because this past session was short and they needed to get things done quickly and save time. We're heading into next year with a regular length session, but it's also going to be another budget year. You're in the chambers, you're a chair of an extremely relevant and important committee. What do you think it's going to take to pass actual climate legislation next session?
So I'm a firm believer of prioritizing stuff, right? And if everything is equally important, nothing is important, right? And so I think that's why I'm sort of ruminating on this conversation between multiple committees so that we fashion legislation that deals with resiliency, that deals with home efficiency, that deals with economic development. I think the more people we can have sitting around a table, the higher this rises to the level of priority in the legislature. When there are caucus priority bills, as good as they may be, and everything gets done in the last 2 weeks, you're just jammed into a calendar that sometimes leaves good ideas on the table. And, I think that Representative Palm did a terrific job, compromising, working collaboratively with me and with other people on fashioning 5004. I also think that Joanna from OPM did a fabulous job on Senate Bill 11, trying to fashion a resiliency bill. Those things are important, but leadership makes the decision on what makes the cut in the last 2 weeks because the clock is ticking. And hopefully we have more ability by having more people engaged, bringing a bill forward that doesn't get branded incorrectly when it wasn't, a green monster. It was really an attempt to provide economic incentives. To think that Representative Palm, got CBIA on board with a lot of the stuff that was in there. It wasn't a function of it not being a compromised bill, but if you start out with a name, as somebody else brands you, you better be quick to come back with your own brand. That's why Take Back Our Grid was so important.
Well, Senator Needleman, thank you so much as always. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have, but definitely a lot of continuing conversations. We'll keep watching. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Emma.
And there's still more to come here, though, on The Real Story. We're talking more about the fight against fossil fuels, this time from local activists, the message behind their protests, and why they're calling out Connecticut corporations like Travelers Insurance. Stay with us.